The Valkyrie had watched Earth for nearly 50 years before they made their move, and in all that time, they had seen nothing that worried them. They saw a species that fought itself endlessly, a species that poisoned its own air and water, a species that seemed determined to destroy itself before anyone else could do the job. They saw weakness. And weakness was something the Valkyrie Dominion had learned to exploit across 1,000 conquered worlds. When their armada of 5,000 warships appeared in Earth's sky on the morning of June 15th, 2147, the Supreme Commander Archon Verthax gave the order to begin bombardment without any warning or demand for surrender. There was no point in negotiating with cattle. After all, the first wave of plasma strikes hit every major city on the planet within 11 minutes. New York vanished in a column of blue fire that could be seen from space. Tokyo became a crater of molten glass. London, Paris, Beijing, Mumbai, Cairo. Sydney, one by one, the great cities of humanity were erased from existence as if they had never been. 2.3 billion human beings died in those 11 minutes. And the Valkyrie officers on the command ships watched the destruction with something like boredom. They had done this before, many times, and the results were always the same. The surviving populations would panic and scatter. Their governments would collapse into chaos. Their militaries would fire a few desperate shots before being crushed. And within a week, the processing. Ships would land to begin sorting the survivors. For the slave markets, that was how it always went. Archon Verthax ordered a message, broadcast across all human communication frequencies, his translated voice booming from every radio and screen that still functioned. People of Earth, your resistance is meaningless. Your cities are ash. Your leaders are dead. Kneel before the Valkyrie Dominion or face complete extinction. You have one planetary rotation to submit. He leaned back in his command chair and waited for the begging to begin. But something strange happened in the hours that followed. The human militaries did not collapse. Instead, surviving units began coordinating with each other across national boundaries in ways the Valkyrie surveillance drones had never seen before. Enemies who had pointed nuclear weapons at each other for decades were suddenly sharing intelligence and resources. The human governments did not fall into chaos. Instead, within 72 hours, every remaining nation on Earth held emergency votes and dissolved themselves into a single unified body called the Terran Unified Command. Old grudges were forgotten. Old hatreds were set aside. And the humans who had spent their entire history fighting each other suddenly stopped fighting each other completely. In bunkers deep beneath mountains in Switzerland, in underground facilities in Colorado, in hidden laboratories in the Ural Mountains and the Australian outback, scientists and engineers began working on projects that had existed only as theoretical nightmares. Weapons so terrible that no government had ever dared to build them. Technology so dangerous that the research had been classified and locked away. Now the locks were opened. Now the nightmares were being built. General Marcus Stone stood in the command center of the Terran Unified Command headquarters, located in a converted salt mine 2 miles beneath the surface of Kansas. He was 63 years old, a veteran of 3 wars, and he had lost his wife and 2 daughters when the plasma strike hit Chicago. He did not weep. He did not rage. He simply looked at the reports coming in from around the world and felt something cold and hard settle into his chest like a stone. "What are our options?" he asked. The room full of officers and scientists, limited in the short term. "Sir," replied Admiral Chun, one of the few naval commanders who had survived the initial attack, "we have no way to fight their fleet directly. Our best weapons are like toys compared to their technology. If we try a conventional counterattack, we will lose everything. Then we do not fight conventionally," Stone said. Dr. Elena Vasquez, the head of the newly formed Advanced Weapons Division, stepped forward. She was a small woman with gray hair and eyes that had seen too much death in the past 3 days. General. Before the war, one led a team studying theoretical physics applications that were considered too dangerous to pursue. We have models for weapons that could challenge the Valkyrie, but they would take years to develop. And we would need resources we do not currently have. What kind of weapons? Stone asked. The kind that would make nuclear bombs look like firecrackers, Vasquez replied. The kind that could crack open a planet or kill a star. The kind that humanity was too afraid to build when we were only fighting ourselves. Stone was silent for a long moment. Build them, he said finally. Build all of them. I do not care what it costs or what rules we have to break. We are going to make them pay for what they did. And we are going to make sure that no one ever does this to us again. Meanwhile, on the surface, the Valkyrie occupation forces were landing. They expected to find a broken people ready to be processed. They expected tears and begging and the hollow-eyed stares of the defeated. They had seen it countless times before on countless worlds, but the humans they encountered were different. There was no begging. There was no weeping. There was only a strange, unsettling calm. The humans submitted to processing with quiet obedience. But something in their eyes made even the veteran Valkyrie soldiers uncomfortable. It was not fear. It was not despair. It was not even hatred, though hatred would have been understandable. It was patience. It was the look of predators who knew that their time would come, and who were willing to wait as long as necessary. The Valkyrie did not understand what they were seeing. They had conquered hundreds of species, and none had ever looked at them like this. None had ever given them the feeling that they were not the hunters in this situation, but the prey. They dismissed the feeling as foolishness and continued their work. They would come to regret that dismissal more than anything else in their long and bloody history in the darkness beneath the earth. Humanity began to change. In the occupied cities above, humanity began to pretend. And in the cold silence of space, the Valkyrie fleet orbited a world they believed they had conquered. They had no idea that the countdown had already begun. They had no idea that they had just made the worst mistake in the history of the galaxy. And they had no idea that the quiet species they had dismissed as weak and primitive was about to teach the entire universe a lesson it would never forget. 3 years passed under Valkyrie occupation, and on the surface, nothing seemed to change. The aliens had established processing centers in every major region, and humans were sorted like livestock, some for labor, some for the slave markets of distant star systems, some for purposes that the survivors tried not to think about. The Valkyrie grew comfortable. They grew lazy. They grew certain that Earth was just another conquered world in their vast empire. No different from the hundreds that had come before. This was exactly what humanity wanted them to believe beneath the surface. In tunnels and bunkers and hidden facilities scattered across the globe, the real work was happening. Tens of thousands of scientists, engineers, soldiers, and workers lived in these underground cities. Connected by secure communication networks, the Valkyrie never detected Dr. Yuki. Tanaka worked in a facility carved into the heart of the Andes Mountains in South America. She had been a professor of theoretical physics before the invasion, known for her brilliant but impractical ideas about faster-than-light travel. Now she led a team of 200 researchers who had not seen the sun in 18 months. Run the simulation again, she ordered, her eyes fixed on the holographic display floating in front of her. Her assistant Marcus Webb shook his head nervously. Doctor, we have run it 47 times. The results are always the same. It works. Then run it 48 times, Tanaka said. We cannot afford to be wrong about this. The simulation showed a new kind of engine, something that could fold space itself like paper, allowing a ship to travel distances that would take the Valkyrie years in just hours or days. They called it the Cascade Drive. And it would give humanity a speed advantage their enemies could never match on the other side of the world. In the ruins of what had once been the CERN particle physics laboratory in Switzerland, another team was working on something even more terrifying. Dr. Hans Mueller had spent his entire career studying black holes from a safe distance. Now he was learning how to create them on command. His team had developed a weapon that could generate micro-singularities, tiny black holes that would exist for just a fraction of a second before evaporating. But in that fraction of a second, they would consume everything within 100 meters. The calculations are complete. Mueller announced to his exhausted team, "We can fit the generator on a missile, small enough to be fired from a standard launch tube." One of his younger researchers looked uncomfortable. "Sir, do we really want to build something like this? Once we use it, there is no going back. We will be crossing a line that humanity has never crossed before." Mueller turned to face the young man, and there was no mercy in his eyes. "They crossed that line when they killed my family in Berlin. They crossed it when they turned our children into slaves. There is no line we will not cross to make them pay for what they have done. Do you understand?" The young researcher nodded slowly and returned to his work in the frozen wastes of northern Canada. A different kind of weapon was being created, not machines. But people. Dr. Sarah Okonkwo oversaw the augmentation program, a project that would have been considered monstrous before the invasion. Volunteers, and there was never a shortage of. Volunteers underwent genetic modification and cybernetic enhancement that transformed them into something more than human. They could survive in the vacuum of space without doubt. Suits for short periods. They could go without sleep for weeks. Their bones were reinforced with carbon fiber. Their muscles enhanced with synthetic tissue. Their reflexes accelerated to superhuman levels. The first class of 1,000 augmented soldiers completed their training on the second anniversary of the invasion. Captain James Reyes, one of the first to undergo the process, stood before General Stone in the underground command center. "Report," Stone ordered. Reyes smiled, and there was something predatory in that smile that had not been there before. "We are ready, General. My soldiers can match 10 of their best warriors each. We are faster, stronger, and harder to kill. And unlike the Valkyrie, we actually want this fight." Stone nodded slowly. "Good. Because in 1 year, we are going to give you the fight of your lives." Above ground, the resistance continued to play its role. They sabotaged Valkyrie equipment in small ways that looked like accidents. They gathered intelligence on alien patrol routes, troop numbers, and ship locations. They fed false information through channels they knew the Valkyrie were monitoring. The aliens believed they were dealing with scattered groups of primitive rebels who posed no real threat. They had no idea that every piece of sabotage, every bit of intelligence, was coordinated by a central command that was preparing something far beyond their imagination. Archon Verthax received regular reports from his occupation forces, and each one confirmed what he already believed. The humans were broken, the planet was secure, and the processing of resources and slaves was proceeding on schedule. "These creatures are even more pathetic than I expected," he remarked to his second-in-command during one briefing. "They have barely resisted at all. I had hoped for at least some entertainment." His second-in-command, Admiral Kethron, nodded in agreement. "Perhaps they are simply too primitive to understand what has happened to them, Archon. Some species take generations to accept their new place in the order of things." "Perhaps," Verthax agreed, already losing interest in the conversation. He would never know how wrong he was. As the third anniversary of the invasion approached, the final preparations were made. 300 warships waited in hidden construction yards throughout the solar system behind the moon, in the asteroid belt, beneath the ice of Europa. Each ship was crewed by trained personnel who had spent years preparing for this moment. Each ship carried weapons that the Valkyrie had never seen and could not Imagine General Stone stood in the command center of the flagship, a massive vessel they had named the Retribution. Around him, officers and crew members worked at their stations, running final checks on every system. General, his communications officer reported, "All ships report ready. The cascade drives are online and functioning. Weapons systems are at full capacity." Stone nodded and took a deep breath. This was the moment he had been waiting for since the day his family died. This was the moment humanity had been working toward for 3 years of pain and sacrifice and secret. "Preparation. Open a channel to Earth," he ordered. "All frequencies, all wavelengths. I want every human on the planet and every Valkyrie in orbit to hear this." The channel opened, and Stone spoke the words that would change the galaxy forever. "This is General Marcus Stone of the Terran Unified Command. To the people of Earth, your suffering ends today. To the Valkyrie Dominion, we remember what you did to us. We remember every death, every slave taken, every family destroyed. You thought you conquered us. You thought you broke us. You were wrong." He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was cold as the void of space. "We remember. Now you will too. The hunt is over, and you are the prey across the planet." Humans who had pretended to be defeated for 3 years looked up at the sky and smiled across the orbital platforms. Valkyrie officers scrambled to understand what was happening, and in the darkness of space, 300 human warships powered up their engines and began to move. The first Valkyrie ships to die never knew what killed them. 12 supply vessels traveling near Jupiter simply vanished from existence. There was no explosion, no debris field, no distress signal. One moment they were there, and the next moment they were gone, pulled into artificial micro-singularities that consumed everything within their reach before disappearing as quickly as they had formed. Admiral Catherine stared at the tactical display in confusion. What happened to those ships? Where are they? His sensor officer shook his head in disbelief. "Unknown. Admiral, they are simply gone. There is no trace of them anywhere." Before Catherine could respond, alarms began screaming across every ship in the Valkyrie fleet. 300 contacts had appeared from nowhere, emerging from behind the moon. From the asteroid belt, from beneath the frozen moons of the outer planets. "Impossible," Catherine whispered. "They had nothing. We watched them. They had nothing." But the evidence was right in front of his eyes. 300 warships that should not exist. Built by a species that should not have been capable of building them. Carrying weapons that were about to teach the Valkyrie the true meaning of fear. General Stone watched the Valkyrie fleet scrambling to form defensive positions and felt nothing but cold satisfaction. "All ships. This is the General. Weapons free. Show them what we have learned." The Battle of Earth's orbit began. Human ships moved with impossible speed and grace, their cascade drives allowing them to jump short distances in the blink of an eye, appearing behind Valkyrie vessels before their targeting systems could lock on. Singularity missiles punched holes in reality that swallowed cruisers whole. Plasma lances reverse-engineered from captured Valkyrie weapons and improved beyond recognition cut through alien armor like it was paper. Captain Rius led a squadron of assault shuttles carrying his augmented soldiers directly into the heart of the Valkyrie flagship. They cut through the hull with boarding lasers and poured into the corridors. Like a flood of death, the Valkyrie had never fought anything like them. These humans were too fast, too strong, too relentless. They kept coming even when wounded, kept fighting even when outnumbered, kept pushing forward with a fury that seemed to go beyond mere anger into something primal and unstoppable. Reyes found Admiral Catherine on the bridge, trying desperately to coordinate what remained of his fleet. "Surrender," Reyes said, his enhanced voice carrying easily across the chaos. "And you might live long enough to see what we do to your homeworld." Catherine drew his sidearm and fired. The shot hit Reyes in the chest and barely slowed him down. His enhanced body absorbed the impact, and he crossed the distance between them in 2 quick strides, snapping the Admiral's wrist and taking the weapon. "That was your one chance," Reyes said, and threw Kethron to the floor. "General Stone wants the commanders alive. He has questions." The battle raged for 9 hours, but the outcome was never in doubt. The Velkari had numbers on their side, 5,000 ships to humanity's 300. But numbers meant nothing against an enemy they could not hit, could not track, could not understand when it was over. 4,800 Velkari vessels had been destroyed. The remaining 200 had surrendered or fled. Human losses were minimal: 12 ships damaged, 2 destroyed. Less than 500 casualties. Archon Verthax was captured alive, exactly as Stone had ordered. He was brought to the bridge of the Retribution in chains, forced to kneel before the human general who had just annihilated his fleet. "Do you know who I am?" Stone asked quietly. Verthax said nothing. His face was a mask of shock and disbelief. "I am nobody." Stone continued. "I was a soldier, a husband, a father. I had a family that I loved. And then you came and took everything from me. You took everything from all of us." He leaned down so that his face was level with the Archon's. "But that is not why I want you alive. I want you alive so you can watch what happens next. I want you to see what we are going to do to your people, your worlds, your entire civilization. You cannot," Verthax whispered. "You do not have the power. Our empire spans 100 systems. You are one species on one world." Stone smiled, and there was no warmth in it. "We were one species on one world. Now we are something else. And your empire? Your empire is about to learn what happens when you make enemies of humanity." The Terran fleet activated their cascade drives and vanished into the void, leaving Earth's orbit behind. Their destination was the heart of Velkari space, and their mission was simple, total, and complete revenge. What followed was not a war. It was a reckoning. Human forces appeared without warning in Velkari systems, striking military installations and then disappearing before reinforcements could arrive. Colony worlds were blockaded, their supply lines cut, their populations left to starve or surrender. Shipyards that had taken centuries to build were reduced to atoms in minutes. The Velkari tried to fight back, but they could not match human speed or human weapons. Every battle ended the same way, with Velkari ships burning and human ships moving on to the next target. And then the Terran fleet arrived at Kethfor, the Velkari homeworld. It was a beautiful planet, covered in purple forests and silver oceans, home to 12 billion Velkari and the center of their civilization for 10,000 years. Temples and monuments covered its surface, celebrating the conquest that had built their empire, the species. They had crushed and enslaved. General Stone stood on the bridge of the Retribution and looked at the world that had ordered the destruction of Earth's cities. Beside him, Arkham Verthax was forced to watch through eyes that had finally learned fear. "Please," the Arkham begged. "There are billions of innocent people down there. Children who had nothing to do with the invasion. There were children on Earth too." Stone replied, "My daughters were 7 and 12. Did your soldiers spare them? Did your commanders care about their innocence?" Verthax said no answer. "Deploy the Prometheus array," Stone ordered. The weapon was something new, something terrible, something that would serve as a warning to anyone else who might consider attacking humanity. It was not designed to destroy. Destruction was too quick, too merciful. Instead, the Prometheus array ignited the upper atmosphere of Kethfor, creating a perpetual firestorm that would burn for centuries. The surface remained habitable, but the sky was transformed into an eternal curtain of flame, blocking out the sun, casting the entire world into darkness, broken only by the endless fire above. The Velkari would survive. That was the point. They would live under a burning sky for generations, a constant reminder of what they had done and what had been done to them in return. As the fleet prepared to leave Valkyrie space, Stone made one final broadcast. Let this world serve as a monument to your arrogance. Let it stand as a warning to anyone else who thinks of attacking Earth. We did not start this war, but we have ended it. And if anyone else wants to test our resolve, they are welcome to try. The Terran fleet vanished into the darkness between stars, leaving behind a civilization in ruins and a burning world that would never forget the Valkyrie dominion. Masters of 100 systems, conquerors of countless species, had been brought to their knees in less than a year by a species they had dismissed as primitive and weak, and the galaxy was watching. The Galactic Concord was an alliance of 47 spacefaring species who had divided the known galaxy among themselves over the course of 10,000 years. They traded with each other, competed with each other, and occasionally fought small wars over resources or territory. But they maintained a careful balance that kept any one power from becoming too dominant. They had watched the Valkyrie invasion of Earth with the same detached interest they would give to any other conquest. The Valkyrie were useful trading partners, if somewhat arrogant, and the primitive species on that small blue world were of no concern to anyone. Some members of the Concord had even profited from the situation. The Rethkai Merchants Guild had purchased 3 million human slaves for their pleasure houses. The Council of Vorn had provided navigation data to the Valkyrie Armada in exchange for territorial concessions. A dozen other species had bought resources stripped from Earth, or looked the other way while atrocities were committed. They had all assumed the matter was settled. Humanity was just another conquered species, destined to be forgotten within a few generations. They assumed wrong when news of the Valkyrie defeat reached the Concord. There was confusion followed by concern. When reports arrived describing what the humans had done to Kethver, concern became fear. And when human ships began appearing in systems far from Earth, fear became panic. The Rethkai were the first to fall. Their trading stations were scattered across 15 systems, floating cities of commerce where anything could be bought or sold. Human strike forces appeared without warning, their cascade drives making conventional pursuit impossible, and one by one the stations were destroyed. Not quickly. The humans were not interested in quick. They gave each station time to evacuate, time for the inhabitants to flee in escape pods, and watch as everything they had built was torn apart. The message was clear. You bought our people as slaves, and now you pay the price. The Council of Vorn tried to negotiate. They sent diplomatic ships to every known human outpost, offering compensation, offering technology, offering anything the humans might want in exchange for peace. General Stone met with their ambassador personally, a tall, gray-skinned being named Zethril, who represented the highest authority in the Concord. You must stop this, Zethril pleaded. The galaxy is watching what you are doing. You are proving yourselves to be monsters worse than the Valkyrie ever were. This path leads only to endless war. Stone leaned back in his chair and studied the alien with cold eyes. Monsters? That is an interesting word coming from someone whose government helped the Valkyrie find their way to Earth. Did you think we would not discover your involvement? Zethri's gray skin went pale. That was a business arrangement. We had no idea they intended. You had every idea, Stone interrupted. You knew exactly what the Valkyrie did to conquered worlds. You knew they would slaughter billions and enslave the rest. And you helped them anyway because it was profitable. What do you want? Zethril asked desperately. Tell me what you want, and I will make it happen. The Concord has resources beyond anything you can imagine. We can help you rebuild, help you become a great power. We do not want your help, Stone said. We do not want your resources. We want you to understand something, and I need you to carry this message back to the Concord and to every species watching. He stood and walked to the viewport, looking out at the stars that humanity had been denied for so long. My species spent its entire existence fighting itself. We had wars that lasted generations. We developed weapons that could destroy our world many times over. We refined the art of killing to a level no other species has matched. And do you know why? Zethral shook his head silently. Because we had no one else to fight, Stone continued. We were alone on our little world, struggling against each other, never knowing there was anyone else out there. And when we finally looked up at the stars, when we finally dreamed of reaching out and meeting other civilizations, do you know what we found? His voice grew hard as iron. We found a galaxy that was ready to enslave us without a second thought. We found species who saw us as nothing more than resources to be exploited. We found that the universe was full of predators who preyed on anyone weaker than themselves. He turned back to face the ambassador. Well, we are not weak anymore. We are not fighting each other anymore. All that fury, all that violence, all that genius for destruction that we used against ourselves for thousands of years, now it has a new target. You cannot fight the entire galaxy. Zethral protested. Even with your new weapons, you are one species against thousands. We do not need to fight everyone, Stone replied. We just need to make an example of those who wronged us. And we need to make that example so terrible, so complete, that no one will ever think of attacking Earth again. He smiled, but there was no warmth in it. You see, Ambassador, we learned something important from your civilization. The galaxy respects only power. The galaxy fears only consequences. So we are going to give the galaxy something to fear. The Council of Vorn's homeworld did not burn like Kethver. Instead, human ships deployed devices into its sun that caused it to flicker and dim, plunging the planet into a winter that lasted for 3 years. Billions suffered, economies collapsed, and the great civilization that had helped the Velkari find Earth was reduced to begging for aid. Species that had bought human slaves found their ships hunted across the void. Governments that had profited from Earth's suffering found their leaders vanishing in the night, taken by augmented soldiers who moved like ghosts, and the Concord watched in growing horror as the humans methodically worked through their list of enemies, never attacking anyone who had not wronged them, but never showing mercy to anyone who had after 2 years of this selective vengeance. A summit was called on a neutral station at the edge of known space. Representatives from every major power gathered to discuss what could be done. About the human problem, the debates lasted for weeks. Some argued for a united military response, gathering every fleet in the galaxy to crush this upstart species. Others warned that humanity's weapons were too advanced, their tactics too unpredictable, their resolve too absolute in the end. The moderates prevailed. The Concord sent a formal message to Earth, offering recognition of humanity as a sovereign power, full membership in the galactic community, and reparations for the invasion. General Stone accepted the offer. But he added conditions of his own. Any attack on Earth or human citizens, by any species or power, will be treated as an act of war against humanity, he declared in his response. And any such war will not end until our enemies are incapable of ever threatening us again. We have demonstrated what we are willing to do. Let no one doubt our resolve. The message was received and understood. Humanity had announced itself to the galaxy, not as victims, not as newcomers seeking acceptance, but as predators who had chosen to be peaceful for now and the galaxy, for the first time in its long and violent history, began to wonder if peace might be the wiser choice. 50 years had passed since the Velkari invasion, and the galaxy had changed in ways that no one could have predicted. The Terran Unified Command had evolved into the Terran Dominion, a civilization that spanned 112 worlds across 47 star systems. Human colonies thrived on planets that had once belonged to enemies who no longer existed, and human ships patrolled trade routes that crossed half the known galaxy. But the Dominion was not an empire of conquest. After those first terrible years of revenge, humanity had chosen a different path. They traded fairly with willing partners. They shared technology with species who asked for help. They even offered protection to smaller civilizations threatened by larger neighbors. Some called them guardians. Others called them the peacekeepers of the galaxy. But everyone called them dangerous. General Marcus Stone had died 15 years after the war, passing quietly in his sleep at the age of 81. His final words, spoken to his successor, Admiral Chun, were simple. Never let them forget what we are capable of. Never let them believe we have grown soft. The moment they stop fearing us is the moment we become vulnerable again. Chun had taken those words to heart, and so had every leader who followed. The Terran military remained the most powerful force in the galaxy, constantly improving, constantly training, constantly ready for a war that everyone prayed would never come. And it never did. The galaxy had learned its lesson, you see. The burning sky of Kethver was visible to any ship that passed through that system, a permanent reminder of what happened to those who attacked humanity. The Velkari still lived there, 12 billion survivors and their descendants. Existing beneath an atmosphere of eternal flame, they had become a cautionary tale told to children across 1,000 worlds. Do not anger the humans. Do not threaten the humans. Do not give the humans a reason to remember the old days when they painted the stars with the blood of their enemies. On a small observation station at the edge of Terran space, an elderly historian named Kethros was completing his life's work. He was a Velkari, one of the refugees who had fled Kethver generations ago, and he had spent 60 years studying the species that had destroyed his civilization. His book was called The Human Question, and it had taken him longer to write than any other project of his career. Not because the research was difficult, but because the conclusions were so hard to accept. He sat before his computer terminal and began typing the final chapter before the humans came. The galaxy was loud, he wrote. Every species proclaimed its might to the stars. Empires boasted of their conquests and threatened their rivals with destruction. The weak cried out for help that never came, and the strong did as they pleased without fear of consequence. The Velkari were among the loudest of all. We had conquered 100 worlds. We had enslaved dozens of species. We believed ourselves to be the greatest power in the known universe. And when we looked at the small blue world called Earth, we saw nothing but easy prey. We were fools. We did not understand what we were looking at. We saw their wars and called them violent. We saw their weapons and called them primitive. We saw their divisions and called them weak. But we never asked ourselves the most important question. What kind of species could develop so much destructive capability while still confined to a single world? The answer, we learned too late, was a species that had never had anyone else to fight. The humans had spent their entire existence competing against themselves. And that competition had made them into something the galaxy had never seen before, a species that was both unbelievably creative and unbelievably ruthless. When we gave them a common enemy, we united them. When we hurt them, we focused their rage. When we tried to destroy them, we taught them that the only way to survive was to become the most dangerous thing in the universe. And they succeeded. Kethros paused and looked out the viewport at the distant stars. Somewhere out there, human patrol ships were gliding through the void, watching, waiting, protecting. Somewhere out there. The descendants of the species his people had tried to exterminate were living their lives in peace and prosperity. He turned back to his terminal and continued. 50 years have passed since the war, and the galaxy has changed in ways that would have seemed impossible to our ancestors. There are no more great conquests. There are no more empires swallowing the weak. The predators who once terrorized lesser species have learned to keep their ambitions in check. Some say this is because the humans have created a new order, a Pax Tyranna that keeps the peace through strength and diplomacy. Others say it is simply because everyone is too afraid to start trouble. Both explanations are true. The humans did not just defeat the Volcari. They did not just punish those who wronged them. They fundamentally changed the equation of power in the galaxy. They proved that even the mightiest empire could be brought low by a species that refused to accept defeat, that refused to surrender, that refused to stop fighting until their enemies were broken beyond repair. And in doing so, they taught the galaxy a lesson it will never forget. There are worse things than predators in the dark. There are creatures who do not start fights, but who finish them so completely that the very memory becomes a wound. The humans are such creatures. They are not cruel by nature, not aggressive without cause, but when they are pushed, they push back with a force that nothing can withstand. Earth's retaliation was not just brutal. It was absolute. It was final. It was a message written in fire and blood that will echo through the ages. Do not threaten us. Do not harm us. Do not give us a reason to become what we were during the war. And in the wake of that message, the stars themselves grew quiet. Kethros saved the document and leaned back in his chair. Through the viewport, he could see a human patrol ship passing in the distance, its running lights blinking steadily in the darkness. He thought about his grandchildren, born on a refugee station far from the burning homeworld they would never see. He thought about the galaxy they would inherit, a galaxy where peace was maintained not by goodwill, but by fear. He thought about the humans who had made that peace possible through violence so terrible that no one dared to break it. Was it justice? He did not know. Was it necessary? Perhaps was it effective? Absolutely, the galaxy had learned. Some lessons only needed to be taught once Kethros turned off his terminal and rose from his chair. Outside his window, the stars shone cold and distant, their ancient light traveling across the void to reach his eyes. Once those stars had been filled with the sounds of war and conquest, with the screams of the dying and the boasts of the victorious. Now they were quiet. The humans had done that. They had taken a galaxy of predators and taught them all the same lesson. They had proven that there was one species you did not attack, one world you did not threaten, one line you did not cross, and the galaxy, humbled and afraid, had learned to live in peace, not because they wanted to, but because they had seen what happened to those who chose otherwise. The stars remained quiet, and humanity stood watch over a galaxy that had finally learned its place. The universe had gained a guardian, and that guardian would never forget what it had cost to become one.